So what we're going to talk about today are fallacies, and we've touched upon these a little bit when we talked about the fallacy of division and the fallacy of composition. Remember that a fallacy in general is a mistaken reasoning, faulty logic, or a bad inference. Anytime you have a conclusion that does not follow from the premises, the argument is fallacious. And these are emotional fallacies because there is a pathos side to them. Remember the pathos-logos distinction, and these fallacies are mistakes that are connected to the emotional aspect of our psychology. So I call them emotional fallacies. Next week, we're going to talk about fallacies that are just plain mistakes in reasoning. For example, if I said, oh, you live in California? Oh, then you must speak Chinese. So that is bad reasoning, but there's no emotional issue that comes up, as we'll see in the fallacies we're going to talk about here. Also, this batch of fallacies and the ones that we're going to talk about next week, they're all informal. And that's because they have to do with the semantics of the argument as opposed to their structure or form. Think of the parallel to ambiguity. We talked about semantic and syntactic ambiguity. Just like there are two kinds of ambiguity, there are two kinds of fallacies. Fallacies that have a problem with the semantics, or in this case, it will be a problem with truth value. In other words, the truth of the premises doesn't necessarily guarantee the truth of the conclusion. Right? If I tell you it's true that you live in California, that doesn't make it true that you speak Chinese. So that's a fallacy that has to do with semantics because there's not truth preservation. Informal fallacies are lacking in truth preservation. Formal fallacies are problematic because of the form. So here's a form that works. It has a Latin name called modus ponens, and it means the mode that affirms. So here's we might have talked about this before. This is a very simple example of modus ponens. Let's say I make a deal to you. I say, if you ace the final, then I'll give you an A in the course. And you also hold up your part of the bargain, you ace the final. So what follows from that is I will give you an A in the course. The form here is if A, then B. A is you ace the final. B is I'll give you an A in the course. A is the second premise, and the conclusion is B. It turns out that any statement that you put in for A and B is going to automatically be valid just because of its form. Not necessarily because of the truth of the premises, but because of the structure of the form alone. So this is formally valid. The structure or form guarantees a valid argument. I mean, on a piece of paper on the side, make up your own statement for A and B, and even if they're silly, it's still going to work out. If the moon is made of cheese, then Lady Gaga is an alien. Let's suppose the moon is made of cheese. Well, if both those statements are true, then the conclusion is going to follow. So this is valid because of its structure. And there are formal fallacies that are invalid because of their structure. It's not a problem with truth preservation necessarily, but it is a problem with structure. So this fallacy is called affirming the consequent. So it'll be very similar, you'll see this example. We have the same first premise. I make a deal with you, by the way, it's not a hypothetical deal. Unfortunately, it's not true. But I say if you ace the final, I'll give you an A in the course. But this time, you get an A in the course. Does that guarantee that you ace the final? You might think so, but if you think about it, it doesn't, because I didn't say the only way to get an A in the course is by acing the final. Maybe you aced it by doing well in the other exams, by participation score, or maybe you came to office hours and you gave me a sympathy argument. There's lots of ways. I didn't say it's the only way you could get an A in the course. So the form here is similar to modus ponens, same first premise, if A then B, but the second premise is different. It's B, therefore A. So arguments of this structure are going to be invalid. So it's the structure or form that produces an invalid argument. There are some weird cases where you might be able to produce a valid argument, but for our class, let's just ignore those. That's an example. So you can read that on your own, but that's just a weird example. But just for testing purposes and what we're going to be doing, you can just ignore. That's an example of a valid argument that has that form. Okay, moving along. So those were informal fallacies. And other than just knowing the difference between formal and informal fallacies, we're not really going to talk about formal fallacies until we get to deduction. So here's the first informal fallacy of this section, argument from outrage. This is where you substitute angry words or action followed by a conclusion. So instead of premises, you have emotion. And that's the pattern for a lot of these emotional fallacies. In this case, we're substituting anger for reason. So there was an argument, a back and forth, about whether or not we should reform healthcare, and Obama's healthcare plan came up, and one of the members of the U.S. House of Representatives, instead of offering evidence, giving an argument for why it shouldn't pass, he could have said it's going to mean we have to raise taxes, or it's unfair for reasons X, Y, and Z. He got heated and just shouted out to the Democrats, baby killer. And so his argument was we shouldn't pass Obamacare because it'll make us all baby killers, because the funds would go to places like Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood, according to this member of the House, would be government-funded abortions, which would be government-funded baby murder. But instead of appealing to the logo side of his psychology, he gets frustrated and then, in a fury of anger, just shouts out baby killer. Anger in general can just cloud our reasoning. We've all been guilty of this. So if you watch this clip, it's an example of a professor who sees a student take a phone call with their cell phone in the first row, and I'll let you watch it. In this second clip, this is the most clouded someone's judgment I have ever seen. You might have seen this. It's a really angry kid who can't believe that his World of Warcraft subscription has been canceled by his parents, and he just loses it, right? Instead of arguing for why he should keep the subscription, it's just pure rage. And then if you remember, there was a celebrity show with a musician named Meatloaf, and he gets, if you just Google Meatloaf meltdown, you'll get a link to his meltdown with Gary Busey. So those are arguments from outrage. The second fallacy, emotional fallacy, are scare tactics. This is what occurs when you try to get someone to accept the conclusion because the driving force is fear. So if you remember a while back, or every once in a while, there's always a killer bee scare. And maybe you're selling a product called BB Gone, and that is a spray that gets rid of killer bees. You could have a commercial where you really scare people into the possibility of being stung by killer bees, and then, for $9.95 or whatever, buy this BB gun. And here are some clips of more examples of scare tactics. I think one of them, at least, is for those alarm companies. They try to scare you into thinking that, you could be burglarized or robbed at any moment. Someone could break into your house, and there's a dangerous people out there left and right. But maybe the odds, it depends on your neighborhood. Maybe your neighborhood's relatively safe, and you don't really need one of those alarm systems. But they would have you believe that there's danger around every corner. There was scare tactics with swine flu. Swine flu got a lot of press, and people are worried that it was going to be a giant pandemic, and then it ended up not being so bad. There was tsunami coverage that involved some scare tactics. I remember when there was an earthquake in Japan, the local news by our coast in Santa Cruz, they had the camera right on where the waves were crashing, and they're just waiting for the tsunami to hit, and they were just blowing it out. They were just like, what are the waves going to do? And they ended up not doing very much. Going back to Obamacare, there's scare tactics around the death panels, and that if we allow government regulated reformed healthcare in that manner, that the government was going to decide how you were going to die. Okay, next one is argument from pity. This is where our feelings of sorrow for someone drives us to do something or take a certain position on an issue. In other words, we're accepting a claim just because of pity, not for reason. So it's when our pathos side of our psychology is driving our behavior and not our logos. Just think about those ads for aid to third world countries. Now, a lot of these are mixes of pathos and logos. And, there's reason to help these people. Of course there is. You can afford it. And by offering just a little bit, you can do a lot. Those are reasons. But then the ads will show images of starving children that really captures your heart, right? And so a lot of times, advertisers and charities and corporations and companies, they will appeal to both pathos and logos in trying to convince you of something. This is a link to that SPCA commercial with music and just images of dogs and cats that are just suffering. And Sarah McLachlan is sponsoring it, and her really sad music is playing in the background. If you just watch that, instant argument from pity. Here's another example. Don't fire Jones. He won't be able to pay for his kid's cancer treatment. So there's a mix there. There's a reason to not fire him, but it's really it's not really relevant. It depends on the circumstance, but you can see that pity might be a motivating factor. Guilt trips are up next. Whenever you try to persuade someone by making them feel guilty, you've got a guilt trip. What makes this different than argument from pity is moral responsibility. So it might be that I give someone on the street money, a needy person, and it's not because they don't present me with an argument. It's just I feel pity for them, and so I do it. So it motivates me. Again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's a great thing. But notice you might not necessarily feel morally responsible for that person's situation, and that's what makes a guilt trip different than argument from pity. Sometimes you see both hand in hand. Your mom or parent might say to you, your grandfather may not be around forever. You should visit him more. So again, that's a mix. So that's a compelling reason to visit your grandfather, but there's also guilt, right? So you see the pathos and logos working hand in hand. You don't deserve to go out the way you treat your mother, right? Making you feel bad, so motivating you to stay home. Here's traveling with guilt trip airlines. Does your mother know where you're flying today? Have you even gone to visit her lately? Do you even call her anymore? And then we've all seen ads like this. The $4 for that latte could have fed an entire family. Drink up. So that's a mix. How about this one? You just wait till your father gets home. It's the funny fish with the hook, like a lip piercing. And then this is one of my favorites, Roman Catholic guilt trips. So Catholics have a notorious reputation for making people feel guilty. All right, here's the next one. It's called apple polishing, but loosely it's the same thing as kissing butt or brown nosing. It's when you use compliments or flattery to convince someone to do something or accept a claim. For instance, a defense attorney might say to a jury, "It will take an unusually discerning jury to see that my client has been framed." So the defense attorney is appealing to the vanity of the jury and complimenting them. Most people would think that my client is guilty, but because you're so smart, you're going to figure out that he or she's innocent. Or if any of you have gone to buy a suit at a suit store, you'll always get complimented by the sales staff. You look great in that suit. Politicians will suck up to their constituents, and recently it's been fashionable to be sort of folksy. So Sarah Palin was a candidate that kind of ran on her plain spokenness. The politician might say, "I'm just plain folks, exactly like you. We make decisions based on common sense, and that's why I'm a better candidate than my opponent." Realtors often will compliment you. "Oh, you're making the right decision. This is the right time to buy. Interest rates are low." And you might have a mix of reason, but they're also going to kind of compliment you on your great decision to purchase a home. And here's an example from The Office, if you have access to those clips. A lot of these clips you don't need to know. They're just kind of helpful examples. They're not, I would never test you on that or something. This is real apple polishing from a student paper. Ryan Sherbart, modern philosopher and college professor, agrees. If God is absolutely omnipotent, God would be able to create round squares and married bachelors. So the apple polishing is the complement to my title, modern philosopher. That's usually reserved for great philosophers of history rather, and college professor. So I might be one, but just kind of using that right before in a paper when I'm grading them. It's a little bit of apple polishing. And I really got this in a student email. Ryan, I didn't know that class was going to start at 10 a.m. today to take the test. I thought that was going to be on Thursday. Is there any way I can take the test later today or on Thursday, please? FYI, you're my favorite teacher. So that last part, that's the apple polishing. The next fallacy is wishful thinking. This is where we believe something not because of logos, but because we just want it to be true so badly. We accept it because we wish it's true, despite there's not much evidence or no evidence. Sports fans are really guilty of this. The Raiders will win the Super Bowl. The Warriors will go to the NBA Finals. Here's a funny joke about a patient. There's not a thing that medical science can do for you. Have you tried wishful thinking? Or, the problem with the ozone and the global warming. So this person's wishful thinking, why don't the greenhouse gases escape through the hole in the ozone layer? Not likely. We wish it were true. So wishful thinking here, the guy that maybe wants to look like the person in the mirror and is just imagining it because of wishful thinking. Here's a spoof on old comic books. Will he respect my career is the joking wishful thinking of the woman. Will she cook me dinner from the guy? You could say it's wishful thinking that this photo will be noticed for its composition. And here's wishful thinking to an atheist. So according to I'm not trying to make any religious claims here, but an atheist would take this perspective. So spoiler alert, reading the Bible, Jesus dies. Bigger spoiler, he's alive. Wishful thinking, according to an atheist again, when you really want to believe a 2,000-year-old zombie carpenter is alive. Rationalization is our next fallacy. This is when you justify something with a fake reason because you don't want to admit the real reason. When a parent hits a child, they might say, I'm doing this for your own good. And the fake reason is they say it's what's best for the child, but the real reason is that they think their kid's an idiot and they just want to beat the crap out of them. Or I got you a present. It's an iron. Isn't it what you always wanted? The fake reason is that you think it's what they really wanted, but the real reason is you just want your spouse to iron your clothes. And this is one we've all been guilty of. I'm going to stay home from work or school because I don't want to infect my coworkers or fellow students. The fake reason, you're looking out for the welfare of others. But what's the real reason? You're just lazy and you don't want to get out of bed. We can rationalize during Girl Scout cookie season. If I eat the whole box now, I won't be tempted later. Right? So the fake reason is I need to eat them all now so that to avoid temptation later. But the real reason is you just want to pig out on Thin Mints. Here's someone that's rationalizing they want a new computer. They're at work and their computer's old. They might not really need one, but they would want one. It can't be just that the plug's out. That's just too simple and inexpensive. So the fake reason is that to do their work, they need a new computer, but the real reason is they just would like a new computer. Here's rationalization for not picking up after your dog. So so in the summer it's too hot, in the winter it's too cold, but here's the fake reason all year round. And it says, by distributing fecal matter around my neighbor's properties, I'm providing valuable fertilization at no cost. So that's the fake reason. But the real reason is laziness. This next one's really bad, and I apologize in advance. There's a fly on your head, honey. So joking about how frustrated we can get with our partners in a relationship. So fake reason is I need to get rid of this fly, and the real reason is you're driving me crazy. Here's a joke for rationalization for evil and suffering. Alice Glass. If the world didn't suck, we would all fall off. Now, that's not a very good example. It's kind of a joke. Next up, we have argument from popularity. This is accepting a claim simply because it's popular, or because a substantial number of people believe it. So here's a clip, and it gives a good example. I'm not exactly sure which one this one is. It could be the Ash experiment. I don't think it is, but nevertheless, here's another example of argument for popularity. Millions of guys can't be wrong. So just because a lot of people buy a product doesn't necessarily mean that it's any good. Maybe people buy it because it's really, really inexpensive. So just because it's popular doesn't mean it's a good idea. There are two examples of argument from common practice, from popularity. The first one is, sorry, I got disheveled because my phone went off, so we can laugh a little bit. These are two varieties of argument from popularity. The first one is argument from common practice. Do you ever jaywalk or download music illegally? And you might think, oh, it's a common practice, so it's okay. Or it's a tradition, so it's okay to tell your to lie to your kids about Santa Claus. It is, I mean, maybe it's a white lie, but it is a lie. Or what fraternities do with hazing. That's argument from tradition. Just because it's tradition, it doesn't mean that it's okay. I'm not saying that traditions are necessarily bad, but it's something to think about. Think about circumcision. Is it an established tradition? Of course. Is it something that we should continue to practice and is part of a beautiful religious ceremony or just part of a cultural tradition that should go on for years? Or some people argue that's child abuse. I mean, if you think about it, you're severing off part of a baby's genitals, right? Is that really okay? If you just say, well, it's because people have been doing it forever, that's not a good enough reason. People argue that we shouldn't have instant replay in baseball because of tradition. It's a 100-year-old sport and it's worked just fine. And the last emotional fallacy is red herring or smokescreen. This is where you bring up an irrelevant topic or consideration to divert attention from the original issue. So the Bush administration's policies contributed to our economic crisis. Okay, that might be, but if you sidestep the issue and just bring up, well, we haven't been attacked since 9/11. The original issue is the economic crisis, but the person brings up something irrelevant to distract from the original issue. Let's say you're buying a car from a used car salesperson, and you point out, you're like, this has a lot of miles on it. I wanted something with less than 80K. This has 110,000 miles. And instead of addressing that issue, the salesperson might say, hey, but it's a babe magnet. Here's a clip that explains well red herrings. And then here's another office clip. Red herring. We can't worry about the environment. We're in the middle of the war. So the issue is, what do we do about global warming? But they bring up something irrelevant, and that is the war. And so I apologize. I said that was the last one, but this is the last fallacy. Social pressure, or it's also peer pressure, groupthink. Just because there's peer pressure, of course, we all know that doesn't mean that's a good idea. Think about drug usage. What do you think the #1 usage of for experimenting with drugs is? Is it boredom, poverty, peer pressure, or lack of supervision? So according to this Pew study in 2001, it's actually peer pressure, which is a little bit surprising. So just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's a good idea. Think about cultural pressures. People wear deodorants. A logos reason would be because it keeps me fresh when I want to be, and that is good for attracting members of the opposite sex, I guess. But a purely pathos reason is because everyone else does it. Same thing with circumcision. Or taking the man's last name in a marriage. People do it because they get pressured. So society pressures them. And that's also a common practice. But is there a good reason, or is it just an arbitrary sexist practice or tradition? And then groupthink. Watch these clips. These are all really, really good. The first one is an experiment where if everyone's standing the opposite direction in an elevator, people naturally do the same thing. And in the Ash experiment, if enough people give a blatant wrong answer to a question, people will conform, even though they know that it's wrong. And then the last clip is a classic experiment in psychology from Stanley Milgram, where you can get average, ordinary people to conform to the demands of a scientist in a fake experiment and shock people. And they think that this was justification for the Nazis' treatment in World War II. Okay, and that's the end for emotional fallacies.